Welcome to our 9-lesson series called Pulling G's, where we'll study fighter pilot perspectives on faith. My name is Hugh Vest, my call sign is Huge, and I'm a retired fighter pilot with over 4,000 hours. I'll be your guide or your instructor pilot for this journey. So strap inside a $40 million F-16 Viper and come with me for an insider's look at the tactics, training, and technology behind 21st century aerial combat. This study will take a warrior's perspective on faith that'll hopefully inspire you in spiritual combat with the same things, the same tools that make for a leading-edge fighter pilot. Each chapter in this series will start with real cockpit insights, and from there we'll move on to everyday life faith applications, and we'll end with debrief questions for you or your group to look at. So some things we'll talk about is we'll debrief your life's mission like a fighter pilot. We'll strain on the G-forces of this world. We'll study the tactics of our adversary. We'll learn to trust our instrument in faith. We'll also learn to know our -1 checklist for life. We'll see through the black world using our Creator's night vision goggles. We'll explore the call signs of God. And then we'll also look at hangar flying lessons in faith from some of the pioneers out there. So again, as fighter pilots would say, fights on. So before we get into the series and are in chapter 1 and press on with all the other chapters, I'd like to do what we call some administrative details, or admin as fighter pilots call it. So a couple things. First thing is I'd like it, if you get a chance, to take a look at the book, Pulling G's, Fighter Pilot Perspectives in Faith. And I'm the author, Hugh Vest. And this book actually has more chapters in it. It has all the lessons in it, but additional details. And then the good thing is it's also a short read. So I just encourage you to pick it up. It's available on crosslinkpublishing.com. Or if you want to talk to your local Christian bookstore, it's available through the Ingram Distribution Network. And so I'd like to encourage you there to pick up the book if you can. A couple other things is I'd like to thank the Air Force for the chance to do this. And they actually were able to review the material in the book, in which I'll be presenting here, and then found that it's within Air Force policy. And I do have to remind you that none of the views that I'll talk about here represent the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force. So I have to offer that disclaimer. And additionally, there is no classified or sensitive data in any of these. And then finally, I'd like to thank YouTube for giving me this free opportunity to pass on these lessons to you, for you to look at and hopefully enjoy and join me in this journey. So again, welcome. Join me in this journey, and we'll get into chapter 1 and following on chapters here. So fights on. Welcome to the Pulling G's video series. Hopefully you're able to check out Chapter 1 first, but if not, we're glad to have you join us here with Chapter 2. In Chapter 1, for those of you who looked at Chapter 1, we talked about faith and hope and the G-forces of life and how these two things of faith and hope can be used in our lives to help us combat the G-forces in life. So welcome to Chapter 2. The subject today for Chapter 2 is flying on instruments. So the verse we'd like to look at, application verse for Chapter 2, comes from the Bible book of Hebrews, chapter 11, and it's verse 1. This is also known as the Hall of Faith, or the chapter on faith. We'll be talking about that today. So Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1 says, "Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see." A couple things we'll be talking about today is pilots, fighter pilots especially have to trust in their machine. And it's an awesome machine. Obviously, the F-16, F-22, F-35, F-15, whatever, pilots have to trust in that machine. And there are all kinds of things we have to trust in within that machine, all kinds of systems. We have massive computer systems running everything. We have fuel sensors, fuel systems. We have other sensors running the combat systems of the plane. Targeting systems, we have weapon systems, and all these different systems within that aircraft that we're a system that we're managing. And we have to be able to trust in different aspects of that. We have to be able to trust in the engineering that goes behind it, the testing that goes behind it. We have to trust in the maintenance that sets these things up and cares for these systems. And so there's a lot of trust involved in that. And one of the applications that, trust, this idea of trusting in that machine becomes all too real is in the area of instrument flying. And this is where obviously a pilot uses those instruments, some of the basic flight instruments, to basically take us down through the weather to a safe landing. And the first time a pilot does an instrument approach in real weather, man, you feel the sweat, you feel all that comes together where you're training and you're trusting on these instruments to blindly descend through the weather and come into a safe landing. And so before we kick off the discussion, I'd like to kind of show you some of the primary flight instruments for the F-16. This next picture will kind of show you that. On the left side, we have the airspeed indicator, upper left. The airspeed indicator is in nautical miles per hour. So if it says like 2 on it, that's 200 nautical miles per hour. And that's just a little bit more than regular miles per hour. So, for instance, it's about 600 miles per hour is about 500 knots, or nautical miles per hour. On the right side of it is the altimeter. And it'll show you your altitude above sea level, not necessarily above the ground. And then the center, the one thing we'll really talk about today, is the attitude indicator. And the attitude indicator kind of shows you the relation of your aircraft in relation to the horizon out there. So if it's the light color, that means you're climbing. If it's dark, that means you're descending. So take a look at these instruments real quick, and we'll continue our discussion. All right, now that we took a look at the instruments, I'd like to just tell you real quick my favorite instrument story of all time. This comes from, I'm going to go ahead and read this, but this comes from a 1976 Flying Magazine article called 00 by Charles Savoda. And so I'll just go ahead and read it. It's a great story. It happened sometime in 1965 on a routine flight from the Azores to Germany. Halfway to the European mainland, the weather started getting bad. I kept getting updates by high-frequency radio. I remember this is 1965. Our destination, a fighter base, went 0-0. Our two alternates followed shortly thereafter, and all of France was down. We held for 2 hours, and the weather got worse. Somewhere I heard a fighter pilot declare an emergency because of minimum fuel. He shot 2 approaches and saw nothing. On the 3rd try, he flamed out his engine and had to eject. We made a precision radar approach. There was nothing but fuzzy fog at our minimums. The sun was setting. Now I started to sweat a little. I turned on the instrument lights. When I looked out to where the wings should be, I couldn't even see the C-124 navigation lights 85 feet from my eyes. I could barely make out a dull glow from the exhaust stacks of the closest engine, and then only on climb power. When we reduced our power to maximum endurance, that friendly glow faded. The pilot asked the engineer where we stood on fuel. The reply was, "I don't even know. We're so low that the book says the gauges are unreliable below this point." The navigator became a little frantic. We didn't even carry parachutes on regular Mach flights, so we couldn't follow the fighter pilot's example. We would land or crash with our C-124. The pilot then asked me which of the 2 nearby fighter bases had the widest runway. I looked it up, and when we declared an emergency as we headed for that field. The pilot then began his briefing. Now this will be for real. No missed approach. We'll make an ILS and get precision radar to keep us honest. Co-pilot will use half flaps. Then we'll put the approach speed a little higher, but the pitch angle will be almost level, requiring less attitude change in the flare. I'll lock on the gauges, and you get ready to take over and complete the landing if you see the runway. That way there will be less room for trouble with me trying to transition from instruments to visual with only a second or 2 before touchdown. Until we get the runway, you call off every 100 feet above touchdown until we get down to 100 feet, and then we'll use the pressure altimeter, then switch to the radar altimeter for the last 100 feet. And I'll call off every 25 feet. Keep me honest on airspeed also. Engineer, when we touch down, I'll cut the mixtures with the master control lever, and you cut off all the mags. Are there any questions? Let's go. We made a short procedure turn to save gas. Radar helped us to get to the outer marker. Half a mile away, we performed the before landing checklist, gear down, flaps 20 degrees. The course deviation indicator was locked in the middle, with the glide slope indicator beginning its trip down from the top of the case. When the GSI centered, the pilot called for a small power reduction, lowered the nose of the C-124 slightly, and all the instruments except the altimeter froze. 500 feet, I called out. 400, 300, 200, minimums, 100 feet, Air Force minimums. I'm switching to the radar altimeter. 75 feet, nothing in sight. 50 feet, still nothing. 25 feet, airspeed 100 knots. The nose of the C-124 rotated just a couple of degrees, and the airspeed started down. The pilot then casually said, "Hang on, we're landing." Airspeed 190 knots, 10 feet, here we go. The pilot reached up and cut the mixtures with the master control lever without even taking his eyes off the instruments. He told the engineer to cut all the mags to reduce the chance of fire. Contact. I could barely feel it. As smooth as a landing as I've ever known, and I couldn't even tell if we were on the runway because we could only see the occasional blur of light streaking by. Co-pilot, verify hydraulic boost is on. I'll need it for brakes and steering. I complied. Hydraulic boost pump is on. Pressure is up. The brakes came on slowly. We didn't even want to skid this big beast now. I looked over at the pilot. He was still on the instrument, steering to keep the course deviation indicator on the center, and that is exactly where it stayed. Slowly now. Okay, the guys and then the aircraft commander was still all pilot. After landing checklist, get all those motors, radar, and unnecessary radios off while we still have the batteries. Co-pilot, tell them we've arrived. To send a follow-me truck out to the runway because we couldn't even see the edges. I left the VHF on and thanked GCA for the approach. We'd made it. We were actually standing still. The guys in the tower actually couldn't even believe we were there. They'd walked outside and couldn't see or hear anything. We assured them we were there, somewhere on the localizer center line, about half a mile showing on the distance measuring equipment. We waited about 20 minutes for the truck, not being in our customary hurry, just getting our breath back and letting our pulses diminish to a reasonable rate. Then I felt it. The cockpit shuddered as if the C-124 nose gear had run over a bump. I told the loadmaster to go out and check the crew entrance to see what happened. He dropped the door, which is immediately in front of the nose gear, and it hit something with a loud metallic bang. He came on the intercom and said, "Sir, you'll never believe this. The Follow Me truck couldn't see us and ran smack into our nose tire with his bumper. But he bounced off and nothing is hurt." So this is a great story. These guys trusted in their instruments back a C-124 years ago, back in the 60s, to make a landing without ever even seeing the runway all the way through the touchdown in the runway. So it's remarkable. Great story about faith in your instruments. So your instruments can also save you in other ways. I have a quick story, a personal story. And this happened back when in Korea years ago, back in the early 90s. I was flying F-16s there, and I had about 1,000 hours in the F-16 then. So I was pretty getting pretty cocky, pretty arrogant, I guess, in a way, as a fighter pilot. But back then we didn't have any night vision goggles. So night flying back then was something kind of where you got your senses kind of heightened up, and you had to trust more in your instruments. So anyways, we were doing some maneuvers out over the Yellow Sea in one of our training areas, and it was a really dark night. And so sometimes it was so dark that you actually couldn't even see the horizon out there. So there was nothing but, kind of black on black, especially out over the ocean. You could see a few lights in the ocean, maybe ships and things, and sometimes those actually blended in with the stars. So it all kind of went together. So there was a huge lack of perception out there of what the horizon was or where you were. So we were doing some some air-to-air training out there. And so what we do is we'd separate our flight from 2 and 2. We had a 4-ship out there, and we'd start out on different sides of the airspace and doing some basic kinds of maneuvers where we'd simulate taking shots and then defeating the shots and that kind of thing. And so I would start it out kind of trusting my instruments there as we'd maneuver. I'd turn and use my instruments, and everything was working out pretty well. And so I was getting a little bit cocky, I guess, or experienced and kind of over trusting everything. And so I started now relying more on my heads-up display. And so during one of those maneuvers, when I was actually turning to go away from a simulated kind of missile in flight, I buried my nose and I was using my heads-up display versus my instruments and because my kind of reference there. And I realized as I stared out in that heads-up display and I was buried and turned down here pointing towards the ocean, that I had no clue what my attitude was. And so I was disoriented from that turn, and I'd used some G's and pulled into that turn. And now I'm like, man, I'm screaming at the ground. My power's up. I'm pointing at the ground, and I have no idea what my attitude is. And so I remembered my training is to go to your primary flight instrument, that attitude indicator that sits in the middle of the cockpit away from your heads-up stuff. And there's a term we use is called in the gray, roll away, in the black, roll back. And so we actually practiced with our training this instrument kind of recovery when you're in a dive. And so I went to that gauge. I knew it wouldn't lie to me. And I pulled it and leveled my wings, and I pulled up and reduced my power. And I think by the time I pulled out of this dive, I was going over supersonic, and I probably got within about 1,000 to 2,000 feet of the water, which going that fast down pointing towards the water, that's something there. So it got my attention. My heart was racing, recovered, and man, the instruments that day saved my life. There's no doubt. I would have hit the water going over the speed of sound, and that would have been a really bad situation. So the instruments saved me, and my faith and my trust in those instruments. So, in pilot terms for instruments, or trusting in our instruments, faith is really, we have faith in our instruments. And so faith is acting on what we believe, right? It's using our knowledge, our training, and our experience to act on what we believe. In that case, the instruments, we're using our instruments, we're trusting our instruments, we're having faith in our instruments. But even though, we have, that knowledge, that training, that experience, and that belief, our mind sometimes can play tricks on us, right? Even when the statistics all say that everything's fine, our knowledge tells us we need to do this, our minds can play those tricks. And so doubt, fear, and anxiety can kind of work its way in. Probably the best example I could come up with in my life as a fighter pilot is the parachuting experience. So I don't know if anybody's ever jumped out of a plane before. So the military parachuting experience is a little bit different. I went through the military free fall jump course a long time ago, and there was a special forces guy I was talking to. This is a long time ago also. Who've been through all these courses, and I was talking to him specifically about the military scuba diving course, because I was really interested in that. I never took that course, but I loved to scuba dive, and so I was asking about that course, and he had a really interesting thing on the combat diver course. He said, the military has an interesting way of taking something that should be really cool and just beating all the fun out of it. And so that's kind of the way it was with the initial military parachuting free fall course we took. We ended up doing a lot of push-ups and spent a lot of time on our bellies on the ground practicing all the different things, and hanging in harnesses, practicing all our procedures. And so they beat all that stuff into us. So there was a huge amount of training, a huge amount of knowledge that went into this parachuting experience. And if you looked at the statistics regarding this, obviously it's a safe thing. You had your main chute behind you, and you actually even had a reserve chute in front of you that would fire on a pressure altimeter. So if you did nothing, if you came out of the aircraft, hit your head or something coming out, it would actually open for you about 1,000 feet or so above the ground. So we had all this stuff. So we knew everything. But still, when you got on that first parachute jump, you got up in the air, they opened up that door, and you had to kind of lean into that door there on your hands and knees, getting ready to go over the side, looking at the ground. Man, there's all this anxiety and fear that kind of came in. Fortunately for me, training, knowledge, all that took over, and I did exactly what they taught me. But there were some guys that wouldn't jump. And so, even though they had the knowledge, they knew, hey, your reserve chute's going to save you if everything goes wrong. You're going to, trust in your experience. People haven't died doing this. The course had a great record. And so, even though you knew all that inaction and stuff kind of, all that, not inaction, but all that fear and anxiety kind of worked with you in that. And it could overcome what you knew was right in your beliefs. And so that's true. Sometimes our doubts, our anxiety, our fear can trap us in inaction. And fighter pilots overall have to learn to recognize that and to deal with that human machine out there, even when we're tumbling out of control. So faith in life, faith with the big questions, the big things in life, isn't really that different, right? Faith in any other terms too, in life, it means we're trusting in our belief, in our knowledge, and our training and experiences. So faith really isn't that different in life, but we like to separate it, right, from all the other types of faith that we use in different aspects of life. So, we're all tumbling out of control. We're all and I think we're looking for a mission. We're looking for an instrument in life to guide us, to give us direction. Sometimes we turn. I think people turn to science, right? And don't get me wrong. I love science. I think it's great. When I want to know how a radar works, when I want to know how a plane flies, when I want to know some of some of those other things like that in regards with flying, man, I turn to science, right? But science really isn't so good with the great questions in life, is it? The questions of who am I? The question of why am I here, and what happens when I die? So who am I? Why am I here? And what happens when I die? Right? These great questions of life. And science doesn't really have those answers, does it? Science has some interesting answers to those. They say, who am I? Science doesn't really know. You're a cosmic accident. As things kind of came together somehow miraculously, or you're a cosmic accident out there, of atoms that just came together somehow. Why are you here? Science has no idea. What happens when you die? Your atoms are scattered back into the universe, according to science. So, for science, there's something missing, right? There's something missing in navigating life. Science isn't the answer to answering those great questions, those big questions in life. So there's a really good, there's a movie that I like that presents an interesting question there. It's a 1999 Warner Brothers movie called The Matrix. And some of you may have seen that. I'll show you a clip here in just a minute. But in The Matrix, there's a character in The Matrix called Neo. He's the main character. Keanu Reeves plays him. And this character is a computer hacker. And he's plagued by these thoughts that there's something more out there, that his life is not what it seems, that there's something more to life, that there's something going on behind the scenes. And so this character Morpheus out there actually has him come to him with his questions, and he gives him a decision to find out the answer. The decision is either to take the blue pill or the red pill. The blue pill, he tells him, is actually, hey, if you take the blue pill, your life will go on as it has in the past, and you can believe whatever you want to believe. But if you take the red pill, your life will change if you want to go down that rabbit hole and pursue something else. And so, anyways, I'd like you to go ahead and take a look at that. It's a great clip. Again, this is borrowed from Warner Brothers, and it's from The Matrix.
At last. Welcome, Neo. As you no doubt have guessed, I am Morpheus.
It's an honor to meet you.
No. The honor is mine. Please, come, sit. I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole?
You could say that.
I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up. Ironically, this is not far from the truth. Do you believe in fate, Neo?
No.
Why not?
Because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life.
I know exactly what you mean. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there. Like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning. Take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. Follow me.
So I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. Like Neo, I took the red pill. And so I believe that God has placed an itch in our souls to dive down, just like Neo, to dive down that rabbit hole after our Creator and find that purpose. Here's a verse I have from the Bible. This is from the book of Romans, chapter 1, verses 20 through 22. It says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his external power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools." So, the red pill, in my opinion, is faith and is God's message. It's all contained within the true flight manual for faith, which is our Holy Bible. And those words in there, what I chose to take that red pill, to believe, to follow, and to trust in Jesus Christ. And I think if you do that, it answers those great questions, right? Who am I? As followers of Christ, we are not a snippet of DNA, an accident, a cosmic accident. We are the work of a creator, a divine creator, an awesome creator. We are the special work of that creator. So who am I? I am that. Why am I here? As in my opinion, what I found as a follower of Christ is, why am I here? I am here to pursue faith in him, to find him, to take that red pill, to discover and know Jesus Christ, to spread his message, to use my gifts and abilities, what God has created in me, to serve others, and to be part of a global mission, an international mission, to serve him and to spread his word. So that's why I'm here. What happens to me when I die? As a follower of Christ, I believe that our choice to take that red pill, to follow Him, extends beyond this world. And He has, when our mission in this world is complete, He has an eternity, another hangar for us in heaven, waiting for us. So Jesus Christ is my instrument panel, writing me when I'm tumbling through this world, pointing me, giving me direction, navigating my life. And He's given me a great mission as a spiritual warrior, and He's also promised me a safe landing in the fog. So I hope you in your life will choose to take that red pill and join our fellow warriors, that you'll explore God's flight manual for life, which is the Holy Bible, and that's the place to start that journey. So I would encourage you, if you haven't started that journey, to take that red pill. So I hope you'll enjoy these discussion questions for your own reflection or for the group that follow. I look forward to talking with you on Chapter 3.